Our Old Testament lesson comes from the book of Isaiah. We read Isaiah 63, 7 through 9. We've been reading Isaiah all through Advent. Isaiah is the Old Testament writer quoted the most in the New Testament, quoted the most by Jesus, and he plays such a pivotal role in framing the identity of Jesus as Messiah. Isaiah 63. I will recount the gracious deeds of the Lord and the praiseworthy acts of the Lord, because of all that the Lord has done for us and the great favor to the house of Israel, that he has shown them according to his mercy, according to the abundance of his steadfast love. For he said, surely they are my people, children who will not act deceitfully, and he became their Savior. In all of their distress, it was no messenger or angel, but his presence that saved them. In his love and pity, it was he who redeemed them. He lifted them up and carried them all of the days of old. Our New Testament lesson comes from the Gospel of Matthew. We read Matthew 2, 13 through 23. Perhaps, not perhaps, but the story we least like hearing during this time of year, but again, a very important part of Jesus' young life. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, get up and take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. So he got up and took the child and his mother during the night and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, out of Egypt I have called my son. But when Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious. And so he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and in its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time that he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, get up and take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for those who are trying to take the child's life are dead. So he got up and took the child and his mother and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in a town called Nazareth. So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene. Amen. This is the word of the Lord. One beautiful thing that happened on Christmas Day was a great-grandmother meeting not one, but two of her brand new, just recently born great-grandchildren. That great-grandmother is my mother-in-law, Susan's mother, Mary, meeting tiny little Annie, who was born recently. Her dad is a Marine pilot stationed in Yuma, Arizona, and they haven't been able to travel because of his duties. And so Annie and her parents traveled 3 days driving across the southwestern United States to get home to Nashville to family for Christmas. The other infant is even tinier, wee little Tate, who was born several weeks early due to complications, and he had to spend a lot of time in the NICU at St. Thomas Hospital in Nashville. So because of his fragility, Christmas Day was his first adventure out into extended family. We saw lots of pictures of these intergenerational introductions and encounters, and we FaceTimed, and we saw those little babies with their tiny little heads and hands and smiles. We think the smiles were related to meeting the family, but with tiny little babies, it could be anything, like gas, or maybe it was family, maybe it was anything. But we know they were smiling, and we hope to see them tonight at another intergenerational meal with that great-grandmother and multiple generations below. What is it about little babies that brings us such joy and wonder. I mean, part of it is their fragility. They're so tiny and yet also seemingly perfect in all of their tininess, knit together inside their mothers until the time is right. And I don't know about you, but I can just stare at little babies for minutes, if not hours. And to hold a new family member for the first time is such a weighty moment, not because the baby weighs anything at all, but because the moment weighs a lot. Talk about bonding, to see the tiny little toes and fingers and to stare into those big blue eyes, and those eyes that the mind is a mirror to. The mind has no clue what's going on except for that feeling of security and love. When you read the Christmas stories, can't you just imagine Mary and Joseph doing this with the infant Jesus, the tiny little Jesus, holding him carefully, holding him so carefully. I don't know about you, but the first time I held each one of my children, I was scared to death. What if I drop them? What if I break her? Can I break this little person? Mary and Joseph had all of these same thoughts, all of this same joy, all around them in the events of that first Christmas and as they unfolded. Mary, we are told, it says that she treasured all of these things in her heart, which meant that she just took it all in emotionally, spiritually. After the pain of childbirth came the satisfaction, the joy of holding and nursing her baby, singing softly to him, staring into his eyes. Joseph, too, I am sure, held on proudly to his infant son, even with those circumstances of Jesus' birth being so unusual for him. Joseph treated Jesus like his own son. What relief there was for him, too, with Jesus' safe arrival. In that day when childbirth could go so wrong and it was so dangerous for baby and mother, don't you know that Joseph just cradled Jesus in his arms and loved him? He also imagined, like every new parent does, what kind of future awaits him? What kind of life would their son have? Well, they don't have to wait very long to find out, as this morning's New Testament lesson tells us. And I want to unpack something this morning that I sort of touched on in my Christmas Eve sermon, if you were here at the 5:30 or the 11 o'clock service. At the end of that sermon, I said this: make no mistake about it, for Mary and Joseph, the birth of Jesus made their lives better and harder. And I talked about how the call of God on them is like the call of God to each one of us. The call of God brought them wonder, and it just brought them great joy and gladness. The things that we are so quick to celebrate at Christmas. The incarnation of God is all about the beginning of the process by which brings us salvation, brings us freedom and healing grace to us. So of course we celebrate at Christmas. But do you notice how quickly the mood shifts and how the tone changes even while Jesus is still just an infant? In Luke, for example, they take the infant Jesus to the temple at 8 days, and they meet a man named Simeon. And Simeon is very old, and he's been waiting to see the Messiah before he dies. So he takes hold of the infant Jesus in his arms and rejoices, and then he turns prophetic. He says, "This child is destined for the falling and rising of many in Israel, and he will face much opposition as he reveals the hearts of many." And then Simeon turns to Mary and looks directly into her eyes and predicts the pain she will feel as the mother of the Messiah. He says to her, "And a sword will pierce your own soul also." In Matthew, the text we just read, we move immediately from the adoration of the Magi with their exceeding great joy, with their gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and we move directly to an urgent need to protect Jesus. Lurking in the background of Matthew's story the whole time is evil King Herod. Herod is the local king ruling on behalf of the Roman emperor. He's in charge of keeping the peace in that region, except we know from sources, not only the Bible, but outside the Bible, what a terrible authoritarian ruler he was. Herod was known for his sort of brutal repression and his very high taxes. His mission, it seems, was to indulge himself while persecuting others to protect his power. He was a terrible ruler. So when these mysterious visitors come from Persia, these wisdom sages, these star watchers, they come to Jerusalem saying that they have been following a star that signifies the birth of a new Jewish king, Herod is petrified. He knows that he has to control the situation, and so he deceives the wise men. He says, of course, he wants to go also and worship this newborn king. So come back and report to me where he is so that I can find him, which is a complete lie because he doesn't want to worship him. He wants to eliminate him. And this is where Joseph's role comes in. And he proves to be so obedient and so wise and so brave. We often ask a question later on. We say, whatever happened to Joseph? We hear about Mary in the New Testament. We know that Mary plays a role in Jesus' life as an adult. And the answer is we don't know what happened to Joseph. But we know enough from this story right here to appreciate him so much and what he did in Jesus' young life. While Jesus is still so tiny, Joseph dreams about an angel, and the angel instructs Joseph to move immediately. Go to Egypt, because Jesus' young life is in grave danger. So think, first of all, for just a few minutes about the risk that Joseph took in order to be obedient. He put himself in serious physical risk in order to protect Jesus. Herod had hundreds of troops under his command. There would be certainly at least a few people who could report about Jesus' birth in Bethlehem. It wouldn't take those troops any time at all to find Joseph and to know that there has been a birth in his family recently. And the awful part of this reading, of course, that we don't like to talk about or read is what historically has been called the slaughter of the innocents. And it's Herod's just raging anger that the wise men have deceived him. So he chooses the nuclear option when it comes to eliminating Jesus. Because he can't find Jesus, he orders the death of all baby boys 2 years old and younger, thinking, well, he'll take care of Jesus as he takes care of all of them. Jesus was born into a world that is hostile to God, and there was evil all around him, which is precisely why he was born in the first place. We can never forget that Jesus' life was itself a battle. It was a spiritual battle for good and for truth against sin and evil. He came from love in order to love, that he might teach us how to love truly and deeply instead of doing the evil that we are naturally inclined to do. Christ was born to defeat evil, and his life was under threat from evil from the very, very beginning. But because Jesus was too small in his infancy to protect himself, Joseph must do it for him. But to do so puts himself in danger. To be faithful to this call of God in his life, Joseph puts his whole life at risk. Walking from Bethlehem to Egypt, it's a journey of about 40 miles by land. But how fast could they go carrying an infant? It would be just a several days' worth journey. We know what would have been done to Jesus and Mary and Joseph if they were caught. Think about this as well. In addition to that physical risk, Joseph put himself also at some considerable financial risk in doing what he did. It cost him his livelihood as a carpenter, at least for a couple of years. In Nazareth, he was the town carpenter. Everyone was his client. He would provide for his wife an infant because there would be enough work, as there always was, repairing and building. But now, how would he make money in Egypt? maybe as a carpenter, but more likely by any means necessary, including hiring himself out as a servant. He would take on menial jobs and day labor in Egypt. We don't know exactly how long they stayed there, but most experts peg it at between 2 and 4 years. There's an image on the bulletin cover of a famous painting called The Flight to Egypt. As this journey is often called, you can see Mary riding on a donkey, holding Jesus carefully. What is Joseph carrying? A staff, a cloak, a canteen for water, and a small basket for food. He left everything of monetary value behind in order to be obedient to God. And I wonder if you and I ever risk anything for the sake of Jesus. You ever risk anything for the sake of the gospel? We are not, thankfully, in a place where living faithfully puts us at risk all the time, or maybe even ever. But I do think there's something that we can learn greatly from Joseph. You may find yourself in a place where you're called to sacrifice, maybe physically or financially, or perhaps to leave behind something important, maybe even a job, in order to be faithful. If your workplace involves you regularly in something wrong, then would you trust God and give that up in order to have a better life obedient to God? Perhaps God is calling you to serve in a place where you feel scared, some kind of community service in a place where you feel scared because that's in a part of town that you are not normally inclined to go, but there's a need there, and you have the know-how or you have the resources and the heart to help. There are times when we are called to take on some risk for the sake of Christ. And I also wonder if you noticed the timing of Joseph's obedience. Twice an angel comes to Joseph with the command, and twice he has this choice to obey or not. Not only does he obey, but he does so without delay. He does it immediately. In verse 13, an angel of the Lord comes to Joseph in a dream at night and says, "Get up and take the child to Egypt." So Joseph woke up and got up right then and there during the night and went with haste toward Egypt. No planning, no pondering what to do, no analyzing the message and wondering about the different possibilities of what the angel might have meant or weighing the pros and cons of the decision. No. He heard the message of the angel and acted decisively. And the same thing happens again, and then he has another dream a little later. The angel says, "Get up and go," and Joseph got up and went, bringing Jesus and Mary with him. How often do you and I delay and analyze and ponder and wait when God is calling us to do something now? I mean, it's one thing to be wise and to consider options, and that's good and wise, but it's another thing to be indecisive because we are nervous or just lazy. We know what to do, but we wait because it might be hard. God has great things in store for us, and we hold back. We might be afraid of the difficulty or afraid of what others might think of us. What can you and I learn from Joseph, who heard the call, acted decisively and faithfully? And then last, I see Joseph open to communication from God that he might have otherwise ignored, or we might. What is a dream anyway? 3 times he is visited in the night by an angel in a dream. We all dream every night, apparently. They tell us multiple times. Have you ever woken up like I have from a dream, and you sat up and you thought for a few seconds, is that a dream? It was just a dream, right? Whew, it was just a dream. Minister's dream, here's the minister's dream. We're constantly running late. I don't know if you ever had this. We're constantly running late, but we can't find our sermon, and there's always someone in the dream who shouldn't be there, who's completely out of place. There's a lot to say about the psychology of dreams and what our minds and subconsciouses do when we dream. I'm fascinated by dreams and trying to understand some of my own dreams, and sometimes they're confusing. and I have no idea what my brain is trying to do while I sleep. But Joseph was open to the idea that God communicates with us in unconventional ways that are beyond normal circumstances. And it's just true. If God communicates with you regularly like I'm communicating with you now, then that is so wonderful for you, but you are very unique. Normally, God is more subtle. God speaks through music, of course, songs that we might hear, through other people, through coincidences that are too coincidental to be only coincidences. Maybe you're praying over a problem and your phone rings and the person calling has had the same problem, but they're calling about something completely different. But you start talking anyway about that problem. Maybe you're agonizing over a decision and you have a dream about someone from high school you haven't talked to in 30 years, and then you run into that person the next week in the grocery store, and you're wondering, are you trying to say something, God? Maybe you need advice and help and a song comes on the radio. Maybe you're struggling with a decision and the preacher whose sermon is too long already nevertheless stumbles into saying something helpful like, listen to God speak to you in unconventional ways because he will. God will speak to us just like he did to Joseph. And it might seem unusual, but it will be unmistakable to you, and you should listen. So here we are at the end of the year, resolutions to be made in the next day or two. I wonder if you and I might resolve to be a little bit more like Joseph and be willing to assume a little more risk in our obedience to Christ. I wonder if we might also resolve not to delay and not to waste time, but be more immediate in our obedience to God's call. And may we also be open to the alternative ways in which God will communicate with us, because he is speaking all the time if we have ears to hear. He will guide us into a better life, a life with Christ that almost certainly will be harder, as it was for Mary and Joseph, but also so much better than anything they or we can imagine on our own. Happy New Year. Amen.